So for me growing up, most of my family spent most of their time feeling stuck in their career. They often wouldn't even consider themselves to have careers. They might have had jobs, but not careers. See, for my family, a job was just a job. It was a way to support a family, a way to put food on the table, not necessarily something associated with happiness. And this is especially true for my dad. My clicker is off. He was one of the most intelligent people that I've ever met. He got his law degree and he graduated and he practiced law for a while and realized that he didn't really enjoy it. So he stopped. And in some ways, this was really noble, the idea of leaving something that he didn't enjoy to go and find something else that he enjoyed more. But in the end, it's not like he sacrificed that career for happiness. Ultimately, he just didn't find either. He never really had a job that he enjoyed. It never seemed like he was on a path to somewhere, and he never really made any money. So this talk is about some of the ups and downs that I've gone through in my career. And I wanted to share with you some of the things that I've learned in the hopes that you can use them to strive for happiness in your career or your life, whatever that may look like for you. So this story starts with my career starting at Microsoft. I joined Microsoft right out of college as a technical evangelist, and my job was to give talks and workshops and demos. And so at the age of 22, I found myself speaking to audiences of developers, many of which had been writing code longer than I had been alive. So as you can probably imagine, there was a lot of uncomfortable feelings in doing this, and I experienced a lot of imposter syndrome. What in the world could I possibly offer a room full of people who have been writing code for 20 plus years when I only just now graduated from college? But as I started to do this more and more, I started to give more talks and more lectures. I realized that people made a choice to come and see me speak because I had something that I knew that they wanted to learn that they didn't know. And so as I did this more and more, I started to build up all of this confidence, and I got a lot more comfortable in doing it. And at the end of my first year, I got a really good review. And at Microsoft, that led to a really good bonus. And I took that bonus money and I bought a ring. And I took that ring and I proposed to my wife. And a year later, we got married. And so with all of this confidence, so many good things happening in my life, I started to think about my overall career happiness. And the one thing that I really wanted to do was live in New York City. This had always been my dream. It was something that my wife and I shared. We had visited in college several times. And I told my manager this, and it just so happened that right around the same time, a spot opened up on our team in New York City. And 3 weeks later, my wife and I moved to New York City. And obviously I joined a new surroundings, right? This is my view from my apartment, or the rooftop of my apartment in Brooklyn overlooking the New York City skyline. So I had new surroundings. I had a new team that I was really excited to work with, and I had a new manager. But unfortunately, I never felt like that manager really paid attention to me. I'll give you a couple of examples why. Often during our one-on-ones, he would be going through the drive-thru at McDonald's to order food, or he would be going to Starbucks to pick up his coffee. And I never really felt, like I said, like he was paying attention and really understanding me. And so fast forward a little bit to the end of my career at Microsoft, when I had my last review with my manager. And I was expecting I had done my job and I had done well, and I kind of expected to get a relatively positive review and a bonus in a certain range up here. And when I got my bonus, I was really shocked. It was significantly lower than I ever expected. My manager never once throughout the year told me that I was doing a poor job, or that I wasn't doing my job as well as I should be, or I wasn't keeping up with the rest of the team. And he also wasn't able to articulate any specific reason during that actual review of why my bonus was so low. And it seemed like I hadn't done well, even though he didn't have anything to say about it. So I realized two really important things in that scenario. One, no matter how good or bad your manager is, or the people around you are, or how helpful they are, ultimately where you want to go in your career and what you want to do in your career is totally up to you. You have to be your own conductor. Regardless of any outside influences, what you do is up to you. And the second thing I learned was that I should have been a lot more vocal. I should have been asking questions. I should have been asking more direct questions. I should have been asking them more frequently. I shouldn't have put myself in a position to be surprised when the time came for that last review, because I should have been asking those questions throughout the year. So one of the things you might be wondering is, why would I leave a tech company, one of the best tech companies in the world, in Microsoft? And the thing I haven't told you is, in May of 2016, standing on that same rooftop in Brooklyn overlooking the New York City skyline, I got a call from my dad, and he told me that he was diagnosed with cancer and had 6 months to live. Around that same time, my wife and I had been kind of talking about what was next for us. We knew we didn't want to stay in New York City forever. We kind of wanted to get a house and a yard and settle down. So we decided we would move back to Memphis, and I would be able to spend the time that my dad had left with him. And in doing so, I was trying to find a job at Microsoft that would make sense to stay with that company. But long story short, it just didn't work out. And so I reached out to my manager, who I worked with in my internship at FedEx here in Memphis. And I told her I was moving to Memphis. I was looking for a job. And she said, great, we're going to be hiring shortly for these new positions that we have because of all this work that we have. And so things seemed to be lining up as best as they could at the time, but they didn't really go quite as expected. About a week after I moved to Memphis, my dad passed away. So instead of the 4 to 5 months that I expected to have, I got 1 week. Obviously not what I was hoping for, but I'm very appreciative for the time that I had. And then 2, the time before the interview at FedEx took a lot longer than I expected. So when my dad passed away, there was a lot of logistical things for me to take care of. My mom had passed away 2 or 3 years before that. So everything with the house and the car and everything in the house, all that stuff I had to take care of. So I took a lot of time to do that and kind of deal with the emotional impact of everything. And after a month or so, my wife would check in and say, hey, have you heard anything from FedEx? And I would say, no, not yet. I'm just waiting on the call to set up the interview. And a couple of weeks later, she would ask the same thing, and I would say the same thing in response. I'm just kind of waiting on them to come back. And then a month later, she said, you know how we like to have food and clothes and all these things? Well, they cost money. Have you heard anything from FedEx? And I realized that I couldn't control how quickly an interview might come with FedEx. But what I could control is being damn sure that when that interview came, I was as prepared as possible so that I could nail it and ultimately get that job. So I started to do a lot of things. I started watching YouTube videos. I started taking Udemy courses. I started investing in the community, meeting people and networking. And by the time I had the interview, I was able to talk about all these things that I've been working on. I was able to show the site that I built from scratch, talk about all these things I've been learning. And I didn't know this at the time, but the people who interviewed me walked away from that interview having no doubt that I was the person that they wanted to hire. So looking back, in the midst of all of these emotional things going on, I left a career at Microsoft. My father passed away. I was unemployed for several months. I realized that I just needed to focus on what I could control. There's lots of things to deal with, yes, but what were the things that I could control? I could control preparing for an interview, even if I couldn't control when I would get it. And ultimately, that landed the job at FedEx and started my career for the next 3 years. And when I joined FedEx, I learned about something called SAFe. This is a scaled agile framework, and it's basically a methodology or a framework to do agile at really big companies. And so the way this works is you take 10 weeks. These are 5 2-week sprints. And the 5th sprint is supposed to be something called innovation and planning. And so in that sprint, you plan for the next 10 weeks worth of work. But then you also do innovation. And so when this was explained to me, we talked about hackathons and learning opportunities and all this sort of really creative stuff. But I realized that nobody was doing that at all. We talked about it, but I didn't see one person actually doing that. So in a room full of not quite this many people, but 60 or 70 people, I raised my hand and I said, hey, we keep talking about this stuff, but I don't see anyone doing it. I would like to try something. I would like to schedule hackathons during these innovation and planning sprints. And I would like to take a couple of days where we can get people together and we can be creative and innovative and learn and really embrace this new culture that we're trying to adapt. And that led to some pretty cool stuff. We got to do like some IoT stuff. We actually had a really cool demo right before I ended up leaving FedEx that we were able to show off and have light switching on and all that kind of stuff. And the more this grew, the more congratulations I got and good job and kudos and well done and that kind of stuff. But the thing that really stuck out to me was this. It was thanks for being vocal. Thanks for standing up for what you believe in and trying to fight for something that as a company we said we believed in, but we really weren't doing. So I had taken something that I had learned back in my time at FedEx to be vocal, to stand up for myself and the things that I believed in, and I was able to apply it at FedEx. And I got a lot of support, especially from upper management. And I think a lot of awareness and a lot of respect from my colleagues and upper management as well. And so a few months later, my manager called me into her office to have a one-on-one, and she wanted to talk about career. And she said, typically the way this conversation goes is there's two paths. There's the management route and there's the individual contributor route. Do you have any idea which one of those you're more interested in? And I told her I wasn't really interested in the day-to-day activities of being a manager, but I really wanted to be a leader in technology. I really enjoyed teaching. I really enjoyed learning about the latest and greatest technologies. And I wanted to be able to do that for my job, to go out and learn, to have impact and decision-making abilities, and then to filter that down to developers in our organization. And she came back 2 days later and said, we have this architect position available on our team, and we would like to give that to you. It's an architect for the entire organization. And this sounded exactly like the kind of thing that I wanted to do. So at 27, I don't know this for sure, but I was probably the youngest architect at FedEx. Not to mention, this was not just a regular promotion. This was a skip promotion where I skipped an entire level, which if it's happened at FedEx, it's happened very rarely. And so at 27, this was a pretty big accomplishment for me. And this was all from me being vocal and telling my manager, these are the things that I want, and these are the reasons why. And so as an architect, I got to write cool diagrams like this. Lawrence may recognize some of these sketches that don't mean a lot to many people, but that was one of the diagrams that I did in kind of teaching the other people on my team. And I got to take trips to Europe, and I got to spend time with my team and hang out and have a lot of fun. And my wife got to come and meet me in Europe. And oh, by the way, I got to fly first class to Europe, which is pretty cool. And now I'm kind of bougie. And if it's not first class, I'm not quite as happy. And that was all great. But eventually, a lot of what that job became was spending time in meetings. And this was particularly tough for me because these were meetings that weren't necessary to projects that I worked on. And so I felt like my time was being wasted. I would go to work a little less excited about what I was going to do that day. I was a little more excited than I had been to leave work and come home. And in the middle of the day, I was distracted thinking about the things that I really wanted to do, which was creating content and teach people and work with people. And I found myself complaining about those types of things, how much time I was spending in meetings and stuff like that. And I realized I sounded a lot, or I was starting to sound a lot like some of the older generation of employees at FedEx, the people who believed that this was their job, this was their career, this was their company, and they were going to ride things out, and they would come to work and they would complain, and that's just how it was. And I realized that sounded a lot like how my father would have interpreted that situation and the jobs that he had. It was just, it's a job, and you go to work and you do your job, and that's it. And I started to focus on that's not the part of my dad that I wanted to become. And I realized that I couldn't necessarily control being forced to go to these meetings. But what I could control was what my job was and maybe finding another job. So inevitably, I made the decision to leave FedEx and started my career back in January with Auth0. And at Auth0, I get to do all of the stuff that I was distracted thinking about, creating content and speaking and working with people. I get to do that every day, and that's really great. And so looking back on that experience at FedEx, I think it was really important for me to pay attention to my mood. As my thoughts started to change, I was a little less excited to go to work. I was a little more excited to leave work, and I was a little more distracted during the day. I really needed to pay attention and be in tune with what was going on when I was at work. And so a simple ideal here is if you're unhappy with something, or even if you're relatively happy, but it's not quite as happy as you want to be in your life or in your career, it's up to you to make that change. And so I posted this on Twitter, and someone commented back saying, you know, that's great, but it's not that easy. Some people aren't privileged enough to just all of a sudden go find a new job. And I wanted to make sure that I responded in a way that totally acknowledged that sentiment. And so while you can't necessarily control getting a new job or switching careers overnight or in months or in a year, what you can do is you can start to take a course to better your development skills. You can watch some YouTube videos to better development or to improve your development skills. You can reach out to a mentor to ask for advice. You can work on your portfolio to have something you can show in a resume, and you can invest in your community and you can network, because you never know which one of those people might lead to your next opportunity. So if I had the ability now to talk to my dad, I would tell him not to procrastinate. It's never too late, and mind the gap. Look at where you are and the level of happiness that you have, and think about where you want to be and the level of happiness you want to have. Mind that gap and figure out how to get there. And along the way, you take baby steps. You can't do this overnight. It's baby steps to get to where it is that you want to be. So my name is James Q. Quick, and I am extremely happy with where I am in life and in my career. But I owe it to myself to reflect on that and to check in with myself every couple of months just to make sure I'm on the right track. And if not, start to take those baby steps to get back on track. And so do you. Thank you.